In the ancient lands of Eredor, where mist-shrouded peaks met sun-drenched plains, stood the formidable kingdom of Vorlog, perched atop Mount Cinder. Its ruler, Leroy, was a man whose ambition was only outmatched by the darkness in his heart. Vorlag was protected by the Whispering Woods, a dense, ancient forest said to hold forgotten magic, making it a natural fortress. Surrounding Vorlag were smaller, more prosperous nations, their fertile lands and thriving cities, a stark contrast to Vorlag's stark, martial grandeur. Yet, all lived under the creeping shadow of Leroy's iron fist. For years, Leroy had been a cruel but contained tyrant, his power limited by the very medieval technology of his age. He ruled with a heavy hand, his eyes constantly scanning the horizons for weakness in his neighbors. The proud realm of Eldoria to the south, led by Queen Jane, and the stoic plains of Xylos to the east, under King Riley. They feared him, but their combined strength had always been just enough to deter outright invasion. Then came the discovery. Deep within the earthworks of Mount Cinder, Leroy's miners unearthed an ancient vault, not of gold or jewels, but of diagrams and strange, pulsating crystals. Lore whispered of a forgotten civilization of artificers who had once harnessed the very essence of creation. Leroy, with his singular focus on power, saw not knowledge, but a weapon. He forced his alchemists and engineers, under pain of grisly execution, to decipher the artificer's secrets. The result was the Sun Siphon, a device that drew ambient magical energy from the Whispering Woods and converted it into a devastating focused beam of pure force. Its first test turned a distant, uninhabited mountain peak into a smoking crater. The second obliterated a rebellious village, leaving nothing but scorched earth where homes once stood. Leroy, now truly maniacal, had achieved overwhelming power. His laugh echoed through Vorlag, a sound of triumph and utter madness. The Whispering Woods, once a protector, now fueled his destructive ambition. Dread gripped Eredor. Messengers from Vorlag delivered demands for tribute, for fealty, for children to serve his twisted army. Resistance was unthinkable. The Sun Siphon made it suicide. In the muddy village of Oakhaven, nestled at the foot of Eldoria's gentle hills, lived Hemfrey. He was a man of little stature, less strength, and seemingly no ambition. His peers called him Hemfrey the Hopeless, his hands too soft for the plow, his mind too whimsical for the market. He dreamed of stars and the songs of long-dead poets, while the practical world crumbled around him. His wife, Mary, was a woman whose patience had long worn thin. "Hemfrey," she'd sigh, "the grain is low, the roof leaks, Leroy's tax collectors are due, and you're staring at a puddle, finding inspiration?" Hemfrey would only offer a vacant smile. "The puddle, Mary, reflects the sky. A small piece of the infinite, brought to our feet," Mary scoffed. "And the infinite won't put food on our table or stop Leroy's beasts from taking our last copper." One cold morning, after a particularly brutal tax collection where Leroy's enforcers had taken their last goat, Mary looked at Hemfrey with eyes devoid of affection. "I cannot do this anymore, Hemfrey. I cannot live with a man who finds beauty in a broken pot while our lives fall to ruin. You are useless. Aborden. I am leaving. Perhaps in the fields of Xylos, I will find a man who can do something." She packed a meager satchel, her face hardened by years of disappointment. Hemfrey watched her go, a strange ache in his chest, not for her departure, but for the stark truth in her words. Useless. He heard it echo from the mouths of his neighbors, the children who mocked him, the merchants who ignored him. He was nothing. The weight of his own perceived inadequacy pressed down upon him, heavy as a funeral shroud. Demoralization was his constant companion. But as Leroy's tyranny intensified, as reports of the Sun Siphon's destructive power spread, something began to stir within Hemfrey. It wasn't courage, not yet. It was a deep, unsettling sorrow for the suffering he saw. He heard tales of villages razed, families shattered, the very spirit of Eredor being crushed. He saw the dread in the eyes of his neighbors, the quiet despair that had replaced their usual complaints. And in that despair, Hemfrey saw not a reflection of his own uselessness, but a mirror of everyone's fear. One evening, a lone refugee, utterly broken, stumbled into Oakhaven, bearing news of Vorlag's latest atrocity, the obliteration of a peaceful monastery, simply for refusing to pledge allegiance to Leroy's new divine order. Hemfrey listened, and something snapped. The sorrow curdled into a quiet fury. He wasn't useful, no, but was anyone doing anything? The kings and queens were huddled in their castles, paralyzed by fear. If the useful could not act, then perhaps the useless could. He stood up, a gaunt, unkempt figure, and addressed the horrified villagers. "We cannot wait for others. We must act." They stared, bewildered. A few snickered. "Hemfrey, have you finally lost your mind? What will you do? Sing to Leroy until he falls asleep?" The words stung, but Hemfrey held his ground. "I will go to Eldoria. I will speak to Queen Jane. We cannot fight Leroy alone, but together." He trailed off, his voice wavering. He knew how ridiculous he sounded, but the image of the ruined monastery, the terrified refugee, burned in his mind. He had to try. Queen Jane of Eldoria was a woman of sharp intellect and unyielding will, her throne room a sanctuary of polished stone and ancient tapestries. Yet, even she felt the cold grip of dread. Leroy's power was absolute. Her armies, though disciplined, were no match for the Sun Siphon. She paced her chambers, her advisors offering only grim platitudes. Intervention was impossible. Peace was a fantasy. They could only endure and pray. It was into this atmosphere of despair that Hemfrey, a dusty, ill-dressed peasant, requested an audience. The guards initially laughed, but something in his earnest, unwavering gaze prompted one to allow him entry, perhaps as a morbid amusement for the queen. "Your Majesty," Hemfrey began, his voice surprisingly steady, "I am Hemfrey of Oakhaven. I have come to ask you to unite the nations against Leroy." Jane raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something between pity and disdain in her eyes. "My good man, you speak of war when all we can truly do is survive. Leroy's Sun Siphon cannot be overcome. His mountain fortress is impregnable. What arms do you propose we wield against such power? Your farmer's scythe?" "No, Your Majesty," Hemfrey replied, pushing past his own fear. "Not scythes, but hearts. Leroy takes our lands, our gold, our kin, but he also steals our hope, our courage. He wants us to believe we are alone, but we are not. You, Queen Jane, you rule Eldoria. King Riley rules Xylos. Leroy rules only through terror. If we stand together, if we remind our people that their lives, their freedom, are worth fighting for, then perhaps." Jane studied him. There was no grandeur in his words, no strategic brilliance, only a simple, undeniable truth delivered with a quiet, desperate sincerity. She saw the despair in his eyes, but also a tiny, flickering flame of hope that had somehow survived the crushing weight of his own perceived insignificance. "You speak of unity, peasant, but our nations have never truly united. We have treaties, yes, but deep trust? Our histories are fraught with old wounds." "Then let us mend them, Your Majesty," Hemfrey pleaded, "before Leroy's shadow consumes us all." He spoke not of conquest, but of shared humanity, of the moral imperative to protect the innocent. He spoke from the heart of a man who had lost everything but his capacity for empathy. Something in his unadorned honesty resonated with Jane. She saw in Hemfrey not a fool, but a living embodiment of the spirit that Leroy sought to crush. He was a man who, despite every reason to despair, chose to stand. "Very well, Hemfrey," she said, a new resolve hardening her gaze. "I will hear you out. You have awakened a thought long dormant in my mind. But the King of Xylos, Riley, he is a cautious man, and deep in his heart, he fears Leroy most intensely. You must convince him too." King Riley of Xylos was a pragmatist, his life dictated by the harsh realities of the Eastern Front, closest to Vorlag's ever-expanding influence. He had seen Leroy's atrocities firsthand, the scorched villages scarring his borders. When Queen Jane's envoy arrived, accompanied by the disheveled peasant Hemfrey, Riley was skeptical. Queen Jane speaks of unity. Riley scoffed, his gaze fixed on Hemfrey rather than the Queen's messenger. "And sends a peasant to deliver the message? Is this a jest, my Queen? A cruel reminder of our futility?" Hemfrey stepped forward. "No jest, Your Majesty, only the desperate plea of a simple man who has seen too much suffering." Leroy takes. He never gives. He will not stop at borders, at treaties. He will take everything, until there is nothing left but his own cruel monument carved from our bones. He spoke of the refugees, the cries of children, the silent terror that infected every household. He spoke of the ethical atrocity of allowing such evil to persist, of the collective guilt that would be borne by those who stood by. Riley listened, his face impassive. He respected strength, loathed weakness. To unite was to risk everything. To stay separate was to surely die, slowly, piece by piece. Humphrey's words, devoid of grand strategy, instead appealed to a deeper truth, the simple, primal need for survival, combined with a moral obligation. "What plan do you propose, peasant?" Riley asked, his voice rough. "I have no plan of war, Your Majesty," Humphrey admitted. "Only a plan of spirit. We must unite our hearts, our armies, our resources. We must find a way past the Whispering Woods, through Leroy's defenses. And most importantly, we must give our people hope. Hope that they are not alone." Riley looked at Jane's envoy, then back at Humphrey. His mind, steeped in military tactics, saw the impossibility. But his heart, long hardened by loss, felt a flicker of something in Humphrey's earnest gaze. The peasant spoke of a faith that Riley had thought long dead, faith in humanity. "It is madness," Riley finally said. "But perhaps madness is what is needed against a mad king. I will join you, Humphrey. I will unite Silos with Eldoria. But know this, if we fail, the blood of both our nations will be on your hands." Humphrey nodded, his face pale but resolute. "And on mine, Your Majesty. But if we do nothing, their blood is on all our hands, festering in the shadows." The unification of Eldoria and Xylos was a monumental task, fraught with old rivalries and deep-seated mistrust. But Humphrey, the useless peasant, became the unlikely linchpin. He moved between generals and diplomats, not barking orders, but listening, mediating, reminding them of the higher cause. He spoke to the common soldiers, to the farmers, weaving tales of a unified Eridor, free from Leroy's shadow. He became a symbol of hope, a living testament that even the weakest among them could inspire change. Leroy, observing the unprecedented alliance forming on his borders, initially scoffed. "A peasant rallies kings? They are more foolish than I imagined. Let them come. My son Siphon will melt their pathetic armies like snow." His pride blinded him, preventing him from seeing the power of a unified people. The combined armies, a sight unseen in generations, marched towards Vorlag. The mystical Whispering Woods, once a shield, now became a gauntlet. Leroy's scouts and patrols, bolstered by Sun Siphon energy, were devastating. Demoralization spread through the ranks. Many faltered, questioning the wisdom of following a peasant. It was Humphrey who rode among them, not on a war horse, but on a simple donkey, speaking to each soldier, each commander. "Leroy's power is not his own," he would say. "He draws it from the heart of our land, but our power comes from our own hearts, united." He had spent his life observing, and in his wanderings through the Whispering Woods, he had noticed patterns, subtle shifts in the air. A certain path the Sun Siphon's energy traveled. He believed there was a weakness, a way to disrupt the flow of power. He presented his theory to Queen Jane and King Riley. The Sun Siphon needs constant energy. The Whispering Woods are vast, but the artificers, they always had a central node, a focal point where the energy was concentrated. If we can find it, if we can sever that link, even for a moment, Leroy will be vulnerable. It was a desperate gamble, based on the obscure, whimsical observations of a man deemed useless. But they trusted him now. Jane led the main assault, drawing Leroy's forces, while Riley, with a smaller, swifter detachment, followed Humphrey through a forgotten, overgrown path Humphrey had stumbled upon in his youth. The battle raged at the base of Mount Cinder. Leroy, encased in armor that shimmered with Sun Siphon energy, directed his devastating beams, tearing through the Allied ranks. Hope began to wane. Then, Riley's detachment, guided by Humphrey, found it. A hidden cavern, pulsing with the same strange energy as Leroy's weapon. Inside, ancient artificer conduits hummed with raw power. "This is it," Humphrey whispered, his breath catching in his throat. The heart, with more courage than he knew he possessed. Humphrey, guided by the ancient diagrams he had pored over in the refugees' meager belongings, identified a critical junction. He rallied Riley's soldiers, who, with axes and picks, began to hack at the conduits. Sparks flew, energy surged, and then, with a deafening crack, the connection shattered. High above, on the battlefield, Leroy roared as his armor flickered, then died. The sun's siphon beam faltered, sputtering into nothingness. His face, once filled with maniacal glee, twisted into genuine fear. The Allied armies, seeing their chance, surged forward, led by a roaring Queen Jane. Leroy's forces, deprived of their ultimate weapon, were overwhelmed. The Tyrant, for all his power, was still a man. And men, even evil ones, could be defeated. He was captured, his reign of terror brought to a swift, decisive end. In the aftermath, Eredor was a land reborn. The nations rejoiced, but also grieved their losses. The question of leadership hung heavy in the air. Queen Jane and King Riley, the powerful rulers, initially assumed they would carve up the former Vorlag territories. But as they looked upon the unified people, their eyes met. It was not their armies, nor their strategies, that had truly won the day. It was the spirit, the unity, inspired by one man. They called a council of all the leaders. Jane spoke first. "We have seen much. We have fought valiantly. But the man who showed us the path to victory, who reminded us of what it means to be human, was not a king, nor a general. It was Hemphrey, the peasant." Riley nodded solemnly. "He united us when pride and fear kept us apart. He found courage where we found despair. He understood the heart of the land and the heart of its people better than any of us. And so, in an unprecedented act of humility and foresight, the leaders of Eredor, by unanimous consent, chose Hemphrey, the useless peasant, to be their emperor. He, who had once owned nothing but a leaky roof and broken dreams, would now rule an entire continent. He, who had been deemed a burden, would now bear the burdens of an empire. His coronation was a simple affair, yet grand in its significance. He wore no elaborate crowns, only a circlet of polished wood from the Whispering Woods, a reminder of the power he had helped tame. A slight, unexpected disturbance occurred later that day. A woman, her face lined with the weariness of travel, pushed through the crowd. It was Mary, Hemphrey's wife, who had heard the incredible tales of the peasant who became emperor. She looked at him, resplendent in his simple robes, surrounded by kings and queens, and deep regret etched itself on her face. "Hemphrey?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It is truly you. I was wrong. I called you useless. I see now. I was blind. Forgive me." "You beg your forgiveness, my emperor." Hemphrey looked at her. The woman who had once been his whole world, who had broken his spirit with her honest assessment. He remembered the sting of her words, the crushing weight of his initial despair. He felt no anger, only a quiet understanding. "Mary," he said softly, his voice echoing through the hushed hall, "you were not blind. You saw what was before you, a man adrift. It was my journey, my choice, to become more. I forgive you, for you spoke your truth. But the path I walk now, it is not one we can walk together. I wish you peace, and all that you sought when you left." It was not a bitter refusal, but a gentle assertion of his new self, a testament to the man he had become. Her departure had been the catalyst for his transformation, and in a strange way, he was grateful for it. Emperor Hemphrey ruled not with fear, but with wisdom and compassion. He dismantled Leroy's war machines, healed the scars on the land, and fostered alliances that bound the nations of Eredor together in an unbreakable peace. He proved that true power lay not in weapons or conquest, but in the unwavering spirit of a united people, and that even the most unexpected heart could hold the seeds of greatness. And so, the useless peasant, through his unwavering morality and the strength of his simple truth, became the unifying force, the inspiring leader, the emperor of all Eredor, ushering in an era of unprecedented hope and a truly happy ending.